Hindsight is, of course, 2020, but now having practiced law for over 10 years, there is so much that I would have done differently in law school if I had known then what I know now. So here's a list of things that I would have done differently if I had to do law school all over again. Please learn from my mistakes. Okay, so what would I do differently if I had to do law school all over again? Well, the first thing that I would do is I would spend way less time preparing for class. In law school, class participation usually counts for almost nothing. At best, it counts for maybe 5 or 10% of your grade. There's almost no class participation. Preparing for class is a time suck. It doesn't help you on the final exam. Your job is not to understand everything by the time you get to class. If your professor is doing their job, they will help you understand it when you get to class. I know the idea of getting cold called in class is so scary, and nobody wants to look dumb in front of their classmates. But it will not matter how hard you prepare for class, even if you do get called on. The professor creates their questions in a way that no one could possibly answer all of them. If you do the reading, and preferably you use our flipped case method, the link for that is down below, then you'll be prepared enough for class. But you should prepare for class in an efficient way. Don't obsess about getting everything perfect beforehand. Understand by the time you start studying for finals, you will have forgotten everything that you did to prepare for class. I would have put in the absolute minimum to prepare for class and would have used class time to refine my thinking and work on my outline. I would have taken the time I used to spend preparing for class, and I would have started preparing for finals sooner. Because it's the finals where you get your grade, not preparing for class. So in retrospect, I would have spent so much less time obsessing over every nuance and minutia in the case and preparing for class on the odd chance that I got called on by the professor, and I just would have prepared for finals instead. Also, even if your class does have participation points, you don't have to rely on the only interaction of your professor being when you're cold called. You should ask questions of your professor when you have legitimate questions. And on top of that, you should go to office hours and talk to your professor in a less formal environment. These are all ways that you can raise your participation grade while also bettering your understanding of the case material itself. The next thing that I would have done differently is I would have started taking practice tests way earlier. We talk about this a lot at Legal Eagle. Practice tests are one of the most important things that you can do to get better grades in law school. Writing a law school exam is unlike any other kind of writing. That's why English majors have such a hard time with law school. They, more than anyone else, have to undo the habits that they learned in college. A lot of the things that they learn in terms of good writing are actually bad for writing quickly and clearly on a law school exam. And in fact, that's why at Legal Eagle, we created a masterclass specifically teaching people how to think like a lawyer and write like a lawyer on a final exam. I would have started taking practice tests at least halfway through the semester, if not sooner. I know that sounds crazy, but it is never too early to start taking practice tests, and it is guaranteed to get you better grades. The next thing I would have done in law school is I would have taken a course on how to write law school final exams earlier. Because law school final exams are so unusual, and because your law school won't teach you the skill, it is so important to learn what a law school final exam looks like and how you're supposed to write them. Odds are, if you took the LSAT, you probably took some courses on how to answer the questions, whether it is a logic game or reading comprehension. There's so much to learn that's specific to the LSAT that you probably had no frame of reference for in college. The LSAT is not like the SAT, and it's certainly not like your college classes. And it's the same way when you get to law school itself. Law school final exams are unlike any other test in any other field at any other graduate or professional school. They are issue spotting exams where you have to actually use the law itself. Just showing the professor that you know the law is not enough. You have to apply it. There is a method and a science to breaking down issue spotting essays and writing an A exam every single time. And it has very little to do with how much law you actually know. The person that knows less law but more about how to write the essay is going to get a better grade than the person that knows more of the law and memorized more of the facts in class discussion, but doesn't actually know how to spot the issues and how to write them down on the final exam. Like the LSAT, answering law school issue spotters is a skill, and you can get better at any skill. You can also learn how to do that particular skill. There are strategies that you can use to get better over time. And the better you get at final exams, the better your grades will be at the end of the year. The next tip, the next thing I would have done differently in law school is I would have lived much, much closer to campus. When I went to law school, I actually didn't live that far away, but the law school was on one end of the campus, and I lived on the other end of campus. So it took me probably about 45 minutes to walk each way to and from class, because it was a very large campus. So even though I was within walking distance of the law school, it still took 45 minutes each way, or an hour and a half each day out of my day to walk to and from class. And that's only if I went to the law school once a day. If I went twice, then that's 3 hours that I lost. It's even worse for the people that have to commute to school. During that commuting time, you can't study. It's just dead time, and worse, it's probably stressing you out. Driving is no fun when you're on a deadline. One of the worst things you can do is live so far away from campus that you have to drive. Commuting is just the worst. It's time that you can't study. It's probably pretty stressful because driving on a deadline just tends to be very stressful. And it's probably exhausting too. So if you're commuting to class, that is hours a day where you can't study, and it's just making you more tired. So it's going to prevent you from studying later on in the day. Often, if you live very close to campus, there's no doubt that the rent costs are going to be more, but at the same time, you can probably forego the cost of owning a car, having to insure it, having to pay gas. So even though the rent might be more, it might actually save you money in the long run. And frankly, if you're going to law school full time, you're probably already on the hook for spending at least $100,000. So spending slightly more to avoid commuting is completely worth it, especially if you can turn the time that you would otherwise commute to class into studying time where you can get better grades that will result in a better, higher paying job down the line. That's what law school is all about anyway. So if I had to do it all over again, I would have lived as close to the law school as possible so that I could just get up, walk across the street, and then go to law school without even thinking about it. I would have saved so much time. I would have been far less tired, and I would have been able to study more and better. The next thing that I would have done differently, I would have trusted the professor much less. In law school, it's so easy to get in this mindset where your professor is just infallible and they are giving you the law as it exists straight from a Platonic ideal. But the thing is, your first year law subjects, they seem really hard when you're in it, but they're really not. When you start practicing, you realize just how oversimplified everything is. And different law professors have completely different ways of communicating those subjects to students. And there is no universal conception of the law. So it's not like your professor can give you the law as, given by Moses in the tablets or whatever. I would have worried much less about when the professor said conflicting things, when the professor said confusing things. A lot of what you learn in law school is just confusing. It's complicated when you're in it for the first time and you have no frame of reference. I wouldn't really have worried when the professor said things that seemed to contradict each other or said some conception of the law that seemed confusing at the time. Law professors often make things worse. Sometimes they do things to intentionally obfuscate so that they can generate conversation in the class. Remember that the Socratic method exists not for the benefit of students, but for the benefit of the professor to make it interesting for them when they're lecturing. The Socratic method is not a good way to teach the law. It's just simply the historical way that we've used it for 150 years. So I wouldn't have worried as much when the classroom discussion is confusing. I wouldn't have worried when the professor seemed to make it even more complicated. Now I know that almost everything that is discussed in a 1L class is it's settled law. especially when you get into a particular state. Sometimes a state can vary with a different state in terms of law, but for the most part, all of the questions that you deal with in a first year class are completely settled. It's only at the very extreme margins where there's much controversy, but that's not what first year classes test. If the professor created more confusion in class, I simply would have ignored the professor, knowing that I could figure things out later on when I went back to my commercial supplements and worked on my outline, or if I looked up the cases on Westlaw. Knowing what I know now about the law, it would have made life so much easier because I would have realized that the professor is not the best source of the law, and I could always go back and get the black letter law from my outlines and supplements. And speaking of which, if you want additional tips on how to reveal all the mysteries of law school and how to crush your next law school exam, click the link below for our guide on law school. And please subscribe to our channel. We come out with new tips on how to crush law school all the time. And I'll see you next time here at Legal Eagle. Please learn from my mistakes. There's no reason that you should go through the same kind of crap that I have to go through. Start taking practice tests, and it has very little to do with actual very close to campus. Oh, okay.